All right, now it's time to have put out a sigh of relief because everything that we have left to talk about in this chapter gets talked about again, maybe not exactly the same way, but gets talked about again. And so the hint there is I may ask you a question, but probably the focus of the material that will be testable in this particular course, I mean this particular unit of the material is the stuff that's before, which that doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to and shouldn't look through because again, everything in A&P builds on understanding something that came before. So you're still creating a dictionary in your head and this is a Pictionary dictionary, so pictures, function, structure of the tissue that's coming forward. So the types of cartilage, and I think this is where cartilage has no blood flow to it, so it can't repair itself, and that's a problem with cartilage. But that also is why it functions the way it does, because no vascularization, no nerve involvement means that it makes a great protective barrier to areas where is a lot of nerve involvement. Around around the area you have the perichondrium, and that's the outer fibrous layer and intercellular layer where you have the growth and maintenance of the cartilage. Types of cartilage, you have hyaline, elastin, and fibrocartilage. And they are based on their design. So hyaline cartilage is a little stiffer, and you find this in the between the tips of the ribs and the bones of the sternum, and then also in the shoulder. Looks like a picture, shoulder. Elastic cartilage, this is in our ear, elastic cartilage. It makes up the ear, the auditory canal, parts of the larynx. Support, but also tolerates quite a bit of distortion, and will return to its original shape. Then you have the design there. One of the things I like about these pictures is you have the art drawing, and then you have the blow up of the microscope. Fibrocartilage, these are found between the vertebral column, fibrocartilage. Resists compression, that definitely happens in the vertebral column, and also allows movement but also limits movement. So it's not quite as movable as other material that could have been there. So protection and movement, a nice design there, fibrocartilage. Bone tissue, talked about this a little bit, is strong, resists shattering. So it's strong with regard to these collagen fibers, flexible, resists shattering with regard to the collagen fibers. The cell of the bone tissue is an osteocyte. And there's a specific design to bone. This is your first picture of it. You'll see another picture of it when we talk about bone. Membranes, a little bit more about membranes. So there's a little here in membranes that's possibly testable. But we do talk about membranes again. There's 4 types: mucous, serous, cutaneous, and synovial membranes. And what membranes do, and again, this is epithelial cell on a connective tissue, supported by a connective tissue. We don't necessarily call it a basement membrane of connective tissue, but you have epithelial cells attached to connective tissue in these membranes. They create physical barriers. We talked about membranes already in chapter 1 because we talked about serous membranes already in chapter 1. Think of the membrane, the visceral and parietal membrane that's around the lungs, the heart, and the GI tract. Mucous membranes, passageways that will line passageways that have a connection to the outside world, and also what I want to say, where you want to have the ability to have goblet cells to secrete mucus. That mucus then works with the cilia, reduces friction, reduces the lack of movement, I guess. You know, if you reduce friction, you facilitate movement, facilitates absorption and secretion. This is one of the characteristics of mucous membranes is this lamina propria, and that's made up of areolar tissue. And we have areolar tissue. Sorry, I just had my lunch, so now I'm thinking about not this. But I'll get on track. So one of the characteristics of mucous membranes is that you have this grounding or bottom portion of it. We don't necessarily call it a basement membrane. I know I get lazy and call it that. That is made of areolar tissue that is unique to it to give it a specific strength, a specific type of strength, meaning strength in multiple directions. Serous membranes, no opening to the outside world, so line cavities. They're very thin, but they're strong. They also have a foundation of this tissue that has irregular fibers, and they come in multiple layers, 2 layers at least. I mean, only 2 layers. There's no at least to it. So 2 layers with a space in between, and that space in between is going to have fluid, and their job is to reduce friction. Some protection, protection, but they're very thin, but to reduce friction as that organ changes shape. 3 types you have, as I said, your pleural, your pleura, your peritoneum, and your pericardium. Cutaneous membrane skin, we get to talk about that next time, and so we'll talk about the epithelial. Epithelial is epithelial cell, and then you see, and this one, it'll make it pretty clear what that areolar tissue does. What that does is allows an opening type network, so strong opening type network of connective tissue where you can embed all the accessory organs or the accessory structures of the skin. Accessory structures you can think like the hair root, the sweat gland, the nerve, the vascular, so the artery and the vein, and the stratified squamous of the epithelial of the epidermis makes it water resistant, makes skin water resistant. And then your synovial membrane, this is going to line cavities of joints and produce a fluid, so you again reduce friction. So we think with membranes, particularly these membranes, you're thinking of protection and reducing friction with all of them, and all of them get talked about again. Then moving on to the connective tissue then attaches to muscles. You have this fascia, and with fascia you have superficial, deep, and subserous fascia. And what that is are layers that are going to provide different functions. You know, you think of fat as the function that provides superficial, a barrier layer plus also a layer that's connecting the two, and then getting down into the next part, which is muscle tissue. I know I'm moving fast, but I'm trying to get this done so you guys have it all done in this one. The thing that muscle is specialized for contraction. It's the only tissue that's specialized for contraction. 3 types. You have skeletal, cardiac, smooth muscle. Muscles are classified as to whether they're striated or not, and whether they're voluntary or involuntary. Again, a subject we talk quite a bit about when we talk about muscle tissue. And then skeletal muscle, and I bet you know where you find those, and I bet you know what the function is skeletal muscle is. And then cardiac muscle, again, I bet you know where you find it, and I bet you know what the function of cardiac muscle is. The thing about cardiac is it's branched, and you have unique types of connections between the muscle cells. So you have unique type of material between the muscle cells that allow this heart to beat synchronistically, the way we think of it as the heartbeat, and also allows the electrical impulse to pass through the whole organ almost simultaneously. Smooth muscle, this muscle is non-striated, involuntary, and it works and then it relaxes, so it doesn't have to work consistently like the heart or the skeletal muscles. But it does move your food along, does move your urine along, and in the reproductive tract. Neural tissue, our last type to talk about. We find that in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves all over the body. The brain and spinal cord is your central nervous system. Everything else is your peripheral nervous system. And you have neurons, which are the actual cells that can perform electrical communication. And then the supporting cells, which is the neuroglia, which repair, supply nutrients to the neuron, and also a certain degree of protection to the neuron. With regard to the neuron, you do have a cell body, and you have generally one extension off, that's the axon, multiple extensions off the cell body, dendrites. Information comes to this neuron via the dendrites, goes away from this neuron via the axon. And then with neuroglia, the supporting cells, there are multiple supporting cells in the nervous system. What they do is maintain the structure of that particular portion, whether that be a nerve or whether that be the spinal column or the brain, repair tissue that can be repaired, or will fill in spaces if the tissue can't be repaired. And phagocytosis, so the cleanup, to a certain degree cleanup of pathogens, but mostly the nervous system, particularly the brain and spinal cord, have other features where it just doesn't let things in. We call it the blood-brain barrier. Nutrients for the neuron, bring nutrients to it, regulate the composition of the environment around the neuron, so the interstitial fluid, which it's very important that remain in an optimal way for that neuron to function. And not only to function, the brain is very much of a prima donna. If its environment shifts and does not shift in a positive way, if it shifts in a negative way, you have the brain just shutting down. And of course, if the brain shuts down, then death isn't far behind. Well, that's not a very nice place to leave this, but the good news is I am finished with this chapter, which is nice, and we will talk about the nervous system in great detail at the end of this class. So I will move on to chapter 5. See y'all later. Bye.